All right, welcome everybody to this Tao Te Ching series. This is the second episode, and we are doing the "de" part first. So let me hand it over to Jason and Amon. So the format is that we are going to go for Jason or Amon. Do you want any more introduction, or shall we just go into number 40? Right? Okay. So, folks, the format is as follows. We're going to discuss one verse at a time. We invite everybody to read their favorite translations of the verse. We're going to start with number 40. After everybody has read their favorite translation, as many people as want to read, Jason and Amon are going to present their translation, and then we are going to discuss it. When you're reading, just read, no comments, just read, say who the translation is by, and then do the reading. So go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to read number 40. We're going to start with Peter. Peter, go ahead.
All right, I'm going to be translated by Zhaolin Yang. Cycling is how the Tao moves. The weak is where the Tao functions. Everything comes from existence. Existence comes from nothingness.
Thank you, Peter. Next up is Brian, Evanique, Joe, and Kwan. Brian.
Okay. This is Stephen Mitchell. Return is the movement of the Tao. Yielding is the way of the Tao. All things are born of being. Being is born of non-being.
Thank you. Thank you, Penny. Next up is Evanique.
So this version is from the Tao of Christ, a Christian version of Tao Te Ching. Verse 40, everything returns to God. That is the receptive love of God. Heaven and earth and everything in them came into existence out of nothing.
Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Joe.
I'll read the GF Fufang. Returning is the motion of the Tao. Yielding is the way of the Tao. The 10,000 things are born of being. Being is born of not being.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Kwan.
Translation by Professor Moss Roberts, stanza 40. The way moves on by contra-motion. Yielding is the application. Becoming begets all beings below. Becoming begotten of negation.
Thank you. Thank you, Kwan. All right. Next.
Can you do mine? Sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Please read.
Thank you. Here's the my translation. It is through opposites that Tao operates. It is the weak one that Tao assists. All beings in the world are born of being, or in capital. Being is born of non-being. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Peachy. Peachy? Is that how you pronounce it? Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. That. All right. Jason.
I'll let you share, Jason, and I'll read from my copy.
Yeah, okay. Just 1 minute, let me. Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Chapter 40, Returning and Tenderness. Returning is the movement of the Tao. Tenderness is the function of the Tao. All things under the heavens are produced from being. Being is produced from non-being, nothingness.
Yeah, I think this one, it's simple one, and then I see different word, different translation for the first word, 反, and then I see some translators cycling, and I translate as returning. And Peggy translate as opposite. It also makes sense because it's opposite. But well, we can discuss returning or opposite basics. That's the movement. And basically, this one is simple, but I think that's important because basics, when we talk about Tao, and then this chapter talking about two things. What's the movement of Tao? Okay, so if you are a historian, you may think about what's the first movement, the first principle. So it's returning, it's not circular. So if you translate it as cycling, the people, my first reaction is a historian, right? The first movement, the first principle is circular movement. But this one, I think, is either opposite or return, and the same as the function. And it's most translation use the weakness, but I kind of feel weak have a little bit negative feeling. So we decide to use the tenderness is as like a tender as the beginning, like a baby, this kind of meaning instead of weak or sick, this kind of feeling. Okay, so basically we translate 万物烧人 things, and then I translate as all things. That means all the, in general, I think it means all the organisms, okay, in this world, okay, are produced by being, and being is produced from non-being. From Evanic's translation, and definitely makes sense if you tie to Bible, right? That's the last sentence. Being is produced from non-being. Basic is ex nihilo, right? And then everything starts from there. So I think it's simple and really depends who you are, what's your background. You can have a different interpretation. And what I did, I have mentioned many times, Among and I, we try to pick the words most close to the original Chinese character. So that's it. And Among, please.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, this is a pithy little chapter, but last week I know we began, the discussion turned towards yin yang a little bit. And what you have here is sort of a foundational argument for a valuing of yin, and a more explicit argument for yin and yang, or the principle of yin, is coming explicitly. Somebody got that one? Okay. But here, the idea of tenderness as the function of the Tao, or non-being being the basis for all being to be produced, is an argument being set forth that from yin, the Tao arises, or the Tao has a more yin intrinsic quality. More soft, more empty, more capacious. And you're going to see that as a concept then transmuted into, this is how a good ruler or leader should function, is by being more yin, more capacious, more soft, more yielding. And I'll get back to balancing now.
Thank you. Thank you, Amon. Folks, if you have comments, go ahead and type an exclamation mark in chat. Would love to hear from you. We're going to start with Peter, followed by Peachy. Peter.
I think for this one, I want to really focus on this idea of the term weakness instead of tenderness or of yielding, because I do think that it is easy to look at the yielding and tenderness as potential strengths. And I think we've demonized the word weakness in association with vulnerability. This idea of to be without strength, not to use strength to get there, but the abandonment of strength to a place of yin. And I think that is unfortunately counterintuitive in relationship to, I think, to the embodiment of yin, because we think that it is only through strength that we can get to this place. So we hold on, we tense, we have try to connive into types of skillful focus of intensity, and thus try to control instead of giving way. And I feel that the beginning we habitually do not give way is because once we start allowing vulnerability, we start experiencing our own weaknesses, our own issues as such. We stop controlling. And I think that that is really the essence of what the day is referenced in this passage, because that is the one thing you can do. The first and third and fourth passage are about realities, where the function of the Tao is in the tenderness. And I think that is what the instruction in relationship towards our relationship to it is. What does it mean to allow vulnerability, not to move towards it with direction of mind, but merely to give way to it so that we can allow ourselves to experience the natural compulsion of being that we all experience in regards to how we can relate to it better, rather than endlessly trying to rise above it and create an artificial idea of what softness is, instead of merely being, surrendering into it.
Thank you, Peter. Jason, can you make me co-host so I can handle these things? The disturbances. Folks, go ahead. Let's see here. Give me just a second. Jason, can you make me a co-host? Okay. And let's see here. Hold on. Okay, very good. All right. Next up is PG. PG, go ahead.
Thank you. Verse 40 is the shortest. The first two are the most intriguing the lines, I think, because it is one of the two in the book that is inverted. The sentence is inverted, and the verb is omitted. It is critical. Most common translation or interpretation is treat the first character as a returning, revolving, recycling, because it is the one that naturally describes the movement or the motion of Tao. Now, this is quite a valid interpretation, but if we follow the same logic, the next sentence will be like, the weakness is the Tao's function. Now, I know that Jason had softened or altered the word weak to something tender, which is it is some sort of a valid. Let me explain why is this. The word weak, the Chinese text, in ancient time, it really means though someone is weak because of yang, because of the growing. So the word weak is actually with the connotation of being young. This is evident even today when we see in public, when we give a certain in the seats in the bus, a priority group, usually including old, the weak, the expectant mother, and the sick. So there is no such a word about young, because the weak is really mean young. And now the alternative, because I don't feel it makes sense in that logic when it comes to the second line about the weakness being the Tao's function. So I look at a different way. Now the first sentence, the character indeed that Jason mentioned can be opposites. Now I see that character is actually referring to yin yang. the motion of the Tao can be considered as the way the Tao operates. Because indeed, Tao doesn't move. Tao moves through all beings. Because the Tao does non-doing. Right? So what the first sentence is really about, it is through the opposites, or it is through the interplay of the yin-yang, Tao transforms everything, or Tao operates. And this is also explained why the book saying Tao does non-doing, and yet nothing is undone, because everything is done through the yin-yang interaction. You know, when you see a force is become overpowering, then there are other force will make it declining. So that's very much describe the nature. That is actually, there is such a law already in the nature that constrain each other, right? So the traditional translation have that sort of carrying that meaning, that which reach to a extreme reverse is basically saying that. Now, the second line, which is most intriguing, is it is the weak ones that utilize the Tao more fully. That's what effective saying that. Now, it is the weak one that the Tao, where the Tao usage is. Now, why is that? You can observe the nature. When someone is in growing, when they are young, they utilize Tao actually more fully. Let me explain what the Tao really means. What the Tao is really mean is actually the consciousness, pure consciousness, awareness. If you substitute Tao with the awareness, you see all makes sense throughout the book. Now, why young people actually will utilize the awareness more? Because they less engaging their intellect. Because they do less judgment. They see form as no form. They observe an empty chair, not as a chair. They don't have that desire to try to label it until that is being used as a chair, right? It can be used as a table. So they are basically like the Buddhist teaching about the mindfulness. You just, you know, put your attention to the present moment. You don't judge. You don't label. You just do what your awareness telling you. This is exactly about the Wu Wei. Don't engage in your mind and act in spontaneity.
Thank you.
Said enough. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, PG. Appreciate your comments. Jason or Amon, anytime you want to comment on anything, just type exclamation mark to me or raise your hand. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Kwan. Joe.
I guess it was pretty much covered a lot of it there. I mean, the idea of Wu Wei was what I was actually going to focus on, but you could also focus on the idea of the manifested and the not unmanifested. And this is when we initially covered the Tao. We talked at great length about chapter 11, about how there's the spokes and then the hole in the middle for the wheel, and they both have a role. So I do also see in this too, this idea of you're kind of returning to nature, which is an element of stillness. So those are some of my comments. That's all.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Kwan. Kwan, go ahead.
Okay, so what I want to say about the translation that I read by Professor Moss Roberts is that it stresses a lot on what I would call the epistemological interpretation or the mind interpretation, okay? Because I think that the Tao Te Ching is a cosmological understanding of the reality, but I think that that cosmological understanding is also a lot a teaching about the mind. And I read again the second line, yielding is the application. So I understand yielding at having an open mind precisely. Because as PG said, when you are very young, you are more in the pure consciousness mode than the thinking or the mental mode, okay? The conceptualization or the imaging mode that we call the intellect, of course. So here, yielding is the application, is precisely the power of being in the mode of an open mind, or being more on the side of pure consciousness than on the side of conceptual reality. And being at the center, it doesn't mean that, and I would say too that for people having a little bit of Zen meditation experience, going against the intellect is not the solution, because it's rather being centered in the side of pure consciousness and letting the intellect operating normally. Okay, so there's no blocking of the intellect, because I think that most beginner would understand in a caricatural way that we have to block the intellect. The intellect is not blocked, on the contrary, the intellect is functioning normally, but because we simply center ourselves at the center of our spontaneous and natural being. And the last 30 seconds that I want to say, that the last two lines, I like very much the translation, because he completely did not follow the usual traditional translation, and it might surprise people, okay? Because he said, becoming begets all beings below, and becoming begotten of negation. Okay, so the third line, instead of saying being begets all phenomena, for example, he would use becoming for being. And I think it's a very interesting, because he shocked us a little bit by not using the word that we expect that he would use, meaning being, but he used becoming for being. And I think it's quite brilliant, just to shock people out of their traditional mindset. I stop here.
Thank you, Kwan. Next up is Jason.
So, Kwang, let me ask you your translation. So the the third line, the you translate as being, and the second one he translate as becoming.
The third one he translated as becoming begets all beings below. Okay, and I think it's very brilliant, because he shocked us a little bit from the traditional translation, because the traditional translation would have said being begets all phenomena below. Okay, so he just reversed it. I think it was simply brilliant, because it gets us out of traditional mindset, and it's one of the function of philosophy precisely. Okay, to answer to Madeline, the translation is by Professor Moss Roberts, Robert with an S at the end.
Thank you, Kwan.
So just 1 minute. So the translation called the user becoming.
Yes, I read you the third line. Okay, becoming begets all beings below, and the fourth line is becoming begotten of negation.
Okay, I got you. Okay. So I really appreciate the different kind of interpretation, and that's kind of our purpose to do the translation, because of course we all know any translation is kind of interpretation, but the work Amang and I try to do is minimize it, so we will have the room to different kind of interpretation. So I hear different interpretation, especially thank you, Peggy, for deep interpretation. And I think the big argument or big disagreement could be the first word, the fan. I translate as returning, or some translate as opposite. And the second word is the tendering, yielding, or weakness, right, or vulnerability. That all possibility. And I think that's all represent a different kind of thinking. And I believe I'm not reading this one as a forerunner of a Buddhism philosophy. So one example is how do you read Old Testament, right? You can read Old Testament of a foretell the Jesus coming to be, okay? Or you read a Jewish way, okay? You forget about New Testament. And I'm reading the Tao Te Ching as it alone, not foretelling the Buddhism coming. So that's the reason I translate as returning and tenderness, because I tend to think Taoism thinking during that time is thinking about preserve your original energy. So baby is stronger than man because you get older and older and die. So you should preserve your innate capability. So that's the reason I translate it this way. But it just the way I do it. It doesn't limit any different kind of interpretation. Yeah, thank you.
Amon.
Thank you. I wanted to point out the plethora of translations. It gives you insight to the multiple ways of interpreting what are, even in Chinese, very sometimes cryptic and or paradoxical texts that don't, sometimes they seem very clear on the face of it, and then a rereading, oh wait, but that could mean this. So the many connotations that are layered within the text of the Tao Te Ching give rise to all of these different interpretations, which again, I absolutely appreciate. Jason and I have a very particular way we're going about trying to translate the text into a modern English that is dealing with those dual tensions, faithfulness to the original text and honoring the target language as well. One thing I would like to point out, though, that all of this conversation almost makes the Tao Te Ching's case that you can talk about it, but that's not it. You can point a finger at it and indicate it, but that's still not it. All of these are not right or wrong or true or false, but you could think of them as right and more right, you better and even better than, but you're never going to get a definition out of this. You're never going to get a definitive interpretation of it because it speaks to a quintessential mind that exists in each person. And that, I think, was the target level of the text, was to speak to people at that sort of visceral level, have them confront their interpretation, and then when you approach it again, and I've read this text several times over the years, seeing how your original way of interpreting or looking at the text may have shifted because you have been shifting, growing, changing. And so I want to thank everybody, but I also want to extol the value of don't get too hung up on trying to define the definitive interpretations of this, because you're never going to get it.
Thank you, Amon. Next up is JP, followed by Joe. JP.
Hello. When I follow the Tao Te Ching and I want to understand a verse, I like to look at the previous and the last. Oh, no, the previous and the next. So bear with me as I look at the verse 39 for a moment. How people of ancient times possessed oneness. The sky attained oneness and so became clear. Earth attained oneness and so found peace. The spirit attains oneness and so is replenished. The valleys attained oneness and so became full. All things attain oneness and they flourish. And then partway down, I'll skip some. With that oneness, the sky would crack, the earth explode, the spirit exhaust, the valley deplete, leaders would certainly fall, and all life perish. And then 40 tells us about the movement of the Tao. It's returning, it's yielding, whatever words we want to read into this. And being is born of non-being. I'm going to skip to the last line of 41 that tells us it is the Tao alone that nourishes and completes all things. And Ebenezer and Brian mentioned their reading of Joseph Campbell. From 1 to 81 verses, we're in the middle. And right in the middle, we're being told to return. It's almost like there's a story going on here, as if whoever the hero is has gone to where he needs to go. He's done everything he needs to do. There's this oneness, it's been attained. But what has really been attained, no matter what we learn on the way there, that's taken the elixir back with us, as Joseph Campbell said. And from this point on, we're learning what more we need to know the day. And that's what I have. Thank you.
Wonderful, JP. Thank you so much. Next up, would love to hear both Amon and Jason's comment on what JP started out with, saying, reading the verses on either side, chapters on either side. What does that give? So, would love to hear both your thoughts on that. But Amon, go ahead.
I would like to say I do think that it's always wise to read text in context, because as my seafood loves to say, context is everything, which is a really high level concept joke. But I wanted to belie something, JP, you just said about here we're in the middle. And this was something we talked about at the last meetup, only because we're doing this from 38 forward, because the Mao Dong translation begins at 38. So in that version, we're not in the middle. We are 3 chapters in. This is the beginning. This way that the text is compiled reverses the order of focus on day versus focus on Tao. And so here we're in the very inception of the text discussion of De. And therefore it is once again a new way of spinning the text that you're looking at to see it a little differently. That was one of the reasons I was kind of excited to approach this in this De Tao Te Ching format, because it's not often done that way, but it has been done that way. And one of the oldest texts shows us that too is a tradition.
Thank you, Amon. Jason, do you have any comments about reading verses on either side?
No, I don't have much specific. But one thing I feel like is I wish when we do the Confucius Analect, and the people will have this kind of different kind of interpretation, look like the Confucius Analect, people just listen and then don't have too much different interpretations.
Yeah, no, it's a great observation. I mean, I think it's the fact that Tao is very intuitive. It is naming something just barely, and like what people get from it, as Amon was pointing out, these are all kind of metaphors. Whatever we are talking about are just metaphors, a way of kind of transferring what little we know towards the Tao. And the more we have, actually, this is Jason's point, that multiple translations and people engaging the material, we are throwing light on the Tao from multiple angles. So it's very powerful. Thank you. Next up is Joe, followed by Mark. Joe.
Yeah, my question is actually, and I think Jason will probably be able to answer it clearly, is that more about, I was just thinking about it in terms of Western thought, but of being and not being, and the idea of potential and actuality with Aristotle. And does it relate to that at all, in the sense that you have something like the acorn that becomes the oak tree? Or am I misreading and misreading the text, or misapplying the metaphor at least?
Well, I don't want to take too much time, because I think that's the whole big subject, And to me, I make a table to think about it, but I just okay, let's put it this way. I that's only the way I'm thinking this way. So when you read the Tao, right, you can see we are talking about Genesis, okay, in this class. Okay, how does the world start? And this text is talking about from non-being, being, produce all things. That's the way it happened, just like in Genesis, right? How does the world start? And if you go back to the same time, okay, Greek time, most likely in the Western world, Parmenides, right? Parmenides, right? Basics is talking about being. Everything is being, right? So everything, others is just illusion, whatever. And Heraclitus will start from different things. Heraclitus will talk about becoming, right? That's similar to Quan's translation. Buddhism, sunyata, right? Emptiness. Everything is empty, okay, as a foundation. Okay, Hinduism, basics, Brahman, okay, that's the beginning, that's everything. So I think without too many words, and then I just have to look at this chapter in this way if we want to put in the global view of Genesis.
Thank you.
Can I have a quick word to respond to the question?
Go ahead.
We'll be very quick. The book actually very clearly define what is being a non-being, or the Chinese character Wu. It is always exist, nameless and formless. It existed before the universe creation. Now, the Tao is actually used to actually refer to this non-being. So non-being is the only one that is actually the ultimate reality. It is absolute. There is no parallel to it. There is nothing related to it. It creates everything. It's the source. That's what the book made it very clear.
Thank you. Next up is Mark. Mark, go ahead.
Thank you, Srikant. My question follows up on this discussion that's going on right now. I know that Joseph brought up Greek philosophy, and Jason, you mentioned Parmenides. The thing that I was reminded of was the Rig Veda, Book 10, Hymn 129, the Nasadaya Sutta, where we also get a kind of mystical relationship between being and non-being, ultimately very mysterious. I'm just wondering if there's any connection, or if we should read one against the other, or maybe that's counterproductive. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. I don't know. Is there anybody who can comment on that? If you can, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Go ahead.
Let me respond to this one. I kind of stick with being and the non-being. Okay. I know it's not a perfect word, and then of course people have a different interpretation. They have a different professor talk about different way, and that's fine. No, but I choose these two words, being and non-being, for the reason is I want to stick to the you and the wu. Okay, and you can translate as having. Okay, have. And wu means nothingness or emptiness. So I have to stick with these two words, because these two words show up too many times, and I don't want use different words in a different situation. That's why I stick with being and the non-being. And I don't want to use emptiness, okay, or something empty, because I think it's too Buddhism, and I try to separate this Taoism thinking from Buddhism thinking.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Jason. And Srikant, I just have a question for, I don't know if it's JP or JT, I can't really tell.
JP.
But JP made the comment earlier that he identifies the Tao with consciousness. And yet in his previous comment, he mentioned that the Tao is formless, nameless. And so are those two descriptions consistent with each other? Can we say that, yeah.
That was PG. PG,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Let me, thanks for asking. This is actually the center of the book. Indeed, why Lao Tzu, the author, choose the word Tao to actually refer to the non-being, and yet, in later on when it described that the Tao's function, the Tao in the nature, it gave me the feeling he's really talking about awareness, the pure consciousness. So, also to your question, this non-being and the consciousness is the same thing. Anything referring to the absolute is talking about the same thing, because the absolute have no relatives.
Thank you. Thank you.
It transcends time and space. It's always there, and it creates everything and continually with us. In fact, if you look at it, without this awareness, there is no beings. We, in essence, the self is actually awareness. What is that hears? You are hearing me. It's not your ears. It's not your brain, but your consciousness.
Thank you. Thank you, PG. Next up is going to be David, Madeline, and Peter. David.
Right. I just want to add a little maybe modern Western phenomenological view of this, looking at sort of a Hegelian view, which is that being and non-being are treated as being constantly in anything real and present. And they're constant also in relation to each other. They're negating each other. They're in constant negation. And that is a kind of flow, a kind of cycle. So it has a similarity to what is being said in this part of the Tao. They're in constant relation basically to each other, but as you ascend to higher levels of existence, those are still present, and that dynamic is still present. So that distinction can be made. And again, it's like the distinction between consciousness and being. It's kind of an illusory distinction. It's useful. It's a useful framing, but it's not an ultimate truth. So holding consciousness and being at a pole, a subjective and objective, is doing something for your understanding in a certain way, but it's a rigidity, not a complete understanding. And it's not a complete open awareness. It's not this full spiritual truth. So this is very similar in certain ways to what I hear in this teaching. Just wanted to bring in the Hegelian language there.
Thank you. Thank you, David. PG, I want to ask you one more question. You talked about your understanding of the Tao. How do you understand the?
Great question. Tao is absolute. It is the pure consciousness, awareness. Now, what is the? There is the individual's consciousness, which is actually reflect the state of awareness. Now, why individual doesn't have a full pure consciousness? Because we live our life. We play a role in life. Therefore, we have intellect. We engage our intellect. Intellect is the way we live our life. And yet, as soon as we engage in our intellect, our awareness is ignored. And therefore, overall, for individual, the state awareness is the word the. Now, it is this the shape each of us. It is the state of awareness shape each of us. And this the will determine how confident you are, what faith you are, because the faith, the trust, the confidence is the starting point when you do everything.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, PG. Appreciate your thoughts, very original way of approaching everything. So really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Next up is going to be Madeline, followed by Peter. Madeline.
Yes, thanks, Shrikant. And thanks as always, Jason and Aman. And PG, it's delightful to have you on board. So there was in a previous session, we had discussed the Tao as being like a mountain, and the yin and the yang as being like the light side and the shadow side. And so the Tao is like the noumena behind all the phenomena. We can't know what it is. It's behind being and non-being. So I liked what Aman put in chat, the fertile void, because it seems to be a generally Western, and by which I mean Indo-European, so including Buddhist, construct to say, what is the most unchanging thing? That's the most important thing to us. And let's have the most unchanging thing be the most abstract thing. So that's what gives rise to all this stuff about Plato's ideals and that kind of thing. Whereas in fact, most cultures around the world have not been concerned with that at all. They're just like, you know what? Everything started in chaos. It was just this kind of big mucky thing. Everything was mixed together. Here are the stages in which it's formed, and here's the human role in things. So here's how we need to live with it. And they're really not concerned with first causes. So they're not concerned with first causes. They're not concerned with what's the prime mover. It's fine that that's unknown because it's basically unknowable.
Thank you. Thank you, Madeline. Next up is going to be Peter. Peter.
I would like to play devil's advocate to this type of conversation in relationship to what Shrikant had during the Maximus group in regards to the bringing up of other texts and cross-comparing. I do think that this kind of appeal towards universalism, trying to make it all about the same thing cross-culturally, I think it does more of a disservice by conflating and oversimplifying. Because it ignores the nuance of the time and place of how these words and ideas are used within the context of the Tao Te Ching, and trying to look for something, well, common denominator, which I appreciate, but it's like, was Thomas Aquinas and Dante talking about the same God? Yes and no, because they had their own relationships and descriptions and nuance in regards to how they were describing their experience. So it's easy to take non-being and being and look, oh, I've seen those words interchangeably used in all different sorts of philosophies, and maybe it's all the same thing. And in certain respects, it might be, but I do think it ends up ignoring the kind of specificity of what the Tao Te Ching specifically is trying to talk about in your relationship to it. Not merely its easy connection with the existence and non-existence and all different various forms it comes off in different languages. We're trying to, I believe, understand it and relate to it, feel it and experience and try to utilize it within this particular context, insofar as we hope to go deeper into the Tao Te Ching specifically.
Peter, excellent point. I mean, I'll comment very briefly on it, and if anybody else may, I'm throughout in the 52 Living Ideas, we are very big on just communing with the original text, and that is always the foundation, because there, you're looking at a time and place and culture which is different from yours, and there is a lot of temptation of just taking what you have and trying to see some similarity and then saying, okay, I've gotten it. Just spending time with the original. So one thing I really like about what we're doing with Tao Te Ching is number one, that we are reading multiple translations. I think that's a very good way, because these are all people who have tried to commune with the text itself. So a lot of the value comes from reading multiple translations, and it really, you kind of get this sense of richness of what is being talked about somewhat. And then on the top of that, we have Jason and Aman kind of going character by character, and they are actually diving through and doing that. And so I very much respect what you're saying. All right, let's see. If Jason or Aman don't have a comment, then we can go ahead and go to number 41. We are at about 1 hour point, so we always have to move to the next one. I was surprised, this small one took this long, but so anyway, Kwan, did you have a point, or do you want to read 41?
Just reading the 41.
Okay, folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark to read 41. We're going to start with Kwan, Joe, and Kwan.
Okay, so still the translation by Professor Moss Roberts, stanza 41. When men of service hearken to the way, the lofty strive to see it applied. The average cannot seem to decide, while the lower sort grandly deride. Their derision makes Tao's reputation. So the words of guidance says, seers of the way seems not to see, and those who advance to retreat. The smoothest path seems unsure. Honor virtue seems undistinguished. Ample virtue unqualified. Resolute virtue undependable. Stable virtue unfaithful. Pure white seems impure. Broad plains lack angles. Great words take time. Mighty voices rarely sound. Grand vision has no set design. Unknown the way and thus unnamed, but the way it is, the way alone, that brings first motions to fruition.
Thank you, Kwan. Next up is Joe, followed by Peter. Joe.
The wise student hears of the Tao and practices it diligently. The average student hears of the Tao and gives it thought now and again. The foolish student hears of the Tao and laughs aloud. If there were no laughter, the Tao would not be what it is. Hence, it is said, the bright path seems dim. Going forward seems like retreat. The easy way seems hard. The highest virtue seems empty. Great purity seems sullied. A wealth of virtue seems inadequate. The strength of virtue seems frail. Real virtue seems unreal. The perfect square has no corners. Great talents ripen late. The highest notes are hard to hear. The greatest form has no shape. The Tao is hidden and without name. The Tao alone nourishes and brings everything to fulfillment.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Peter.
And this is from Henry Wade, 1982. The first-rate scholar on hearing Tao is diligent in practicing it. The second-rate scholar on hearing Tao wavers between faith and forgetfulness. The third-rate scholar on hearing Tao burst into loud laughter. If not laughed at, it would not be Tao. Hence the following proverbs. He who understands Tao seems confounded by it. He who advances toward Tao seems retreating from it. He who follows plain Tao seems treading on rugged ground. Superior virtue appears to be hollow. Perfect purity appears to be tainted. Vast virtue appears to be inadequate. Solid virtue appears to be infirm. Genuine substance appears to be spurious. Vast space is devoid of corners. Talent is late in maturing. A high note can hardly be heard. The great form has no sign. Tao is hidden and has no name. Only Tao excels in contributing to achievement.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Next up is Penny, followed by Evanique and Peachy.
Okay, this is Stephen Mitchell. When a superior man hears of the Tao, he immediately begins to embody it. When an average man hears of the Tao, he half believes it, half doubts it. When a foolish man hears of the Tao, he laughs out loud. If he didn't laugh, it wouldn't be the Tao. Thus it is said, the path into the light seems dark. The path forward seems to go back. The direct path seems long. True power seems weak. True purity seems tarnished. True steadfastness seems changeable. True clarity seems obscure. The greatest R seems unsophisticated. The greatest love seems indifferent. The greatest wisdom seems childish. The Tao is nowhere to be found, yet it nourishes and completes all things.
Thank you. Thank you, Penny. Next up is Evanique, followed by PG. Evanique.
So mine is the Tao of the Christ, a Christian version of Tao Te Ching by Marshall Davis. So verse 41. When a wise person hears the gospel, he immediately believes and obeys. When a regular person hears the gospel, he partially believes and partially doubts. When a foolish person hears the gospel, he ridicules it. If the way of God were not ridiculed, God would not be God. Thus it is written, the light of God seems like darkness. Spiritual advancement looks like retreat. The smooth way feels rough. The high road looks low. The pure seems tainted, and the right way appears wrong. Steadfastness looks lazy. Morality appears immoral, and even squares look round. The largest ships take the most time to build. The deepest sound is silence, and the subtlest form has no shape. God hides in the unnamed as the foundation of all things.
Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is PG. PG, go ahead.
Thank you. My translation also I have put into the chat room. A top scholar on hearing about Tao practice diligently. An average scholar on hearing Tao ponders its existence. A below average scholar on hearing Tao laughs loudly at it. If it were not laughed at, it would not have been Tao sufficiently. As wise saying goes, a bright way appears dim. A progressive path seems to move backwards. A smooth road looks rough. The highest dirt seems shallow. The whitest appears stained. Abundant dirt seems insufficient. Solid dirt appears shabby. The original quality looks altered. The greatest square has no corners. The greatest vessel is not crafted. The loudest sound is hardly audible. The grandest image is formless. Tao remains hidden and nameless, yet it alone knows how to lend a hand and fulfill. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, PG. Now it's on to Amon and Jason.
Jason, I'll let you put up the translation. Excuse me. And once I clear my throat in everyone's ears, I will read it. Chapter 41, Hearing the Tao. When the superior scholar hears about the Tao, they practice it diligently. When the average scholar hears about the Tao, they ignore it unintentionally. When the inferior scholar hears about the Tao, they laugh at it loudly. If the inferior, hadn't laughed, it would not be the Tao. Thus, here are some sayings. The clear Tao appears dim. The advanced Tao appears retreating. The smooth Tao appears rugged. The superior De appears low. The ultimate whiteness appears spotted. The spreading De appears insufficient. The robust De appears indolent. The real truth appears changeable. The great square appears to have no corners. The great vessel appears to have late completion. The great melody appears to have inaudible sounds. The great image appears to have no form. The Tao is hidden and nameless. Only the Tao is good at providing and completing.
Thank you, Aman. Okay, so a few things. I think the message could be. I assume it's clear. Basics. I think one thing interesting is hearing Dao, and the Chinese word use Wen. Actually, I find out this one interesting. Which in today's language, Wen means smelling, but in the ancient time means hearing. So that means you learn it, you know that. And another thing I would like to mention is the shi, and I translate as scholar. If you are in the Confucius reading, this word shi has a special meaning, and I translate as learned man. And here I kind of assume in Tao Te Ching it just means the person who learn. Okay, so that a different kind of person, if the supreme person or the good student, and some translation call good student, every student foolish. Okay, I think this part is easy. And the rest, the basics is talking about something opposite, right? It's a clear style, it appear dim. Advanced look like, appears retreating, smooth looks rock. That's all opposite, right? And the spirit, then talk about the, right? And it's a superior, it appear low, ultimate whiteness. I think this one, some text would like put this one, this sentence, okay? Some translator put this sentence to the bottom because it looks like it doesn't match with others. But I just decide to stick with the text I have. Okay, and the spreading the 广, that means very wide, and appeared insufficient. And the robust look like indolent. And the real truth, 直真若愚, 愚 means changeable. So it kind of talking about if it's a real truth, it's changeable. Okay, and you may ask why, but that's the text shows. And the rest talk about the great square appears no corner, the great vessel appears date completing, and then I think some translation. It's Page's translation. I think it's interesting. I think you said the great vessel appears to be not crafted, right? Page, is that your translation?
Yes, this is actually based on the different original text.
Okay, what's the text? Can you tell me what's the text?
The original character that is used in the common 1B version is a 1.
Uh-huh.
But in the ancient the transcript that unearthed from ancient Tang, that Deng Huang, actually the version have a character is actually mian.
Oh, okay.
Without the ri.
Thank you. I do have a problem because I have to translate to this way, but it doesn't make sense. But if this word read as mian, okay, so I'm going to change here. Okay, so actually, correct me if I'm wrong, right? So basics. You talk about this word, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Correct. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So another way, I think most of them probably so the last one, the only the Tao is good at providing and completing. So Cheng in general, I can translate as completing. I try to be consistent. And then Dai, this word, basics means lending. So I will translate as providing. So Dao is hidden and nameless. Okay, this one will go back to chapter 1. And then, but only Tao is good at providing and can complete it. That's the text is telling so far. Okay, so Aman, please.
Thank you. And just for the record, having back and forth about the value of Hegel and Schopenhauer in the chat has been delightful. But chapter 41, this is, again, I liked what was it JP who said it earlier? Yes, that reading the text before and after are always good for adding context. And because I know what's coming, 42 is kind of the yin yang chapter. Here, what you're getting again is a bolstering of the claim. What is yin is of more value. What is overlooked and treated as laughable by the inferior scholar is exactly the kind of thing that the superior scholar lies themselves to. They go full tilt bore towards, because they see its unchanging value. And that unchanging value is value that is a truth that appears ever changing. So there's a lot of particular words in here. I think Jason did a great job of kind of pointing the highlight towards them and explaining why choices were made, and the importance of a term like shi, which in Confucian terms, I've always been partial to the term literati as opposed to scholar, but I agree it's it's a $15 word for what really could just be a $10 understanding. I do appreciate how when you retain the here, now this reads a little different than when you see someone's interpretation of virtue or goodness or any other way that the is sometimes translated. Now you start to see, oh, it's talking about something else, something strictly within a Chinese conceptual framework of the time that really demands my understanding for this. The last thing I wanted to point out was when, which is right in the beginning that Jason said he translates as hearing. I like that he translates hearing. The term can actually be used to express hearing, sniffing, and to know something well. And I like hearing here because to know something well is to know it deeply. When we hear something or when we smell something, it bypasses that frontal lobe. It goes right to your limbic system and it kicks you a response that you have viscerally. And so you know something. You don't have to, is this milk gone bad? Yep, I know the milk's gone bad. I don't have to look at the expiration date to figure it out. Or I can swoosh it in there and hear it clunk, clunk, clunk on the side and go, oh, it's gone real bad. So I appreciate those particular choices being made. Otherwise, I think that I feel like this is all a ramp up to 42, but I keep teasing that, mostly because I'm also trying to push everyone along as we go.
Thank you, Amon. All right, so now would love to hear your thoughts. So it's going to be Madeline, Quan, Peter, Joe, and Yulia next. Madeline, go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Shrikant. The language in this one, in 41, is reminding me a lot of Sun Tzu. All of this advancing and retreating, things are rugged and smooth, using different senses to know things. And I'm wondering if anyone else here who knows more than I do, maybe knows if it's the same type of language and imagery that was used previously by Sun Tzu, or if it resonates for you in that way.
Now that you've said something, I'm looking at the parallels.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
think
would-
that's represented the old text, and then I'm glad that you feel this way, and then actually, I think this text has so many different interpretation, And then all texts, including Confucius and okay, you can kind of smell, okay, the flavor of Tao Te Ching here. And the most controversial is the legalism text, Han Fei, okay, which you sounds like a totally opposite. But Han Fei has his own interpretation of Tao Te Ching. So I just that this text could be the most important text in the whole Chinese tradition.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Madeline. Next up is Quan, followed by Peter. Quan.
Okay, before going to my main comment, I would like to keep on with the last question of Madeline. My answer is a little bit reflecting one of my obsession about Chinese civilization. Why do you feel the same smell in all these texts? Well, I would give you guys a very down-to-earth answer. It's because it has been written by the scholars and the aristocrats coming from the period called the Zhou royal house or the Qi royal house of Zhou dynasty. Okay, all those people knew how to read, to write, and to speculate philosophically and epistemologically. Most of the time, they were from the cadet branches of the Chinese nobility. So they received more or less the same education, even if philosophically they can have different opinions, but they receive at the foundation during their childhood to their teenage the same education. So it's not a surprise that we feel the same kind of zeitgeist, if I may say so. That's my down-to-earth explanation why we feel the same kind of stuff. Now I go to my comment about stanza 41. I would say that stanza 40 would be represented by that image, okay? The Tai Chi Tu, meaning the opposing of complementarity and the yin and the yang. Stanza 41 would be more represented by an hexagram, okay? I show a specific hexagram, could be any one of the 64. I would say that once again, I have a proclivity to interpret anything Chinese a lot as a teaching on the mind and the teaching on pure consciousness. In that sense, I'm rather quite resembling to PG interpretation, okay? Until proven otherwise, the classic of Chinese culture and Chinese civilization is about a teaching about the mind and about pure consciousness until proven otherwise. And at stanza 41, I would say that one of the major understanding that we can take from it is that you have different levels of understanding once again. Last time I said that the hexagram can be divided in two, the upper trigram and the lower trigram, but it can also be divided in three, okay? Line 5 and 6 as heaven, line 4 and 3 as man, and line 2 and 1 as earth. And here you can see that when the lofty man hear the Tao, those men epistemologically speaking are in heaven, okay? So they can understand at once. And when the average scholars, which is the level of man, hear the Tao, he cannot seem to decide. He's half convinced and half not convinced. And when the lower kind, symbolizing by earth, hear the Tao, he will laugh, okay? So heaven, man, and earth here can be interpreted as three different epistemological levels and three different spontaneous answer or response to the teaching of Tao. And precisely one of the images that it used in the Tao Te Ching and in all the Taoist texts is that the sparrow cannot understand the vision of the peng, and the peng is a Chinese mythological bird that, let's say I translate that by a phoenix, okay, that the sparrow cannot have the vision of a phoenix. And here, once again, I know that I have a strong proclivity to interpret everything in terms of epistemology and of mind, but stanza 41 for me is quite clearly about the different level of understanding correlating with the epistemological development. I stop here.
Thank you, Quan. Jason.
Yeah,
Good.
Kwang, I like to ask you a question. You talk about all the texts compiled in. You are talking about 记下学宫. Is that the one you are talking about?
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Okay.
when I say all the text, it means all
Yeah.
the text that has been produced during what we call the Chinese classical period. Okay, essentially the period of the Zhou dynasty that you know as well as me has been foundational in the creation of Chinese civilization.
Yeah, but that's I basically okay. So let me ask you this. So you are talking about all these texts. It created a long time ago, but eventually being compiled. And actually, that's Qi, the state of Qi, right? In the state of Qi, 稷下学宫, and then they compile all the text. That's why all the text, the language looks similar. Is that what you mean?
That's one layer of what I meant. Okay, the other layer of what I meant is that during the Zhou dynasty, let's say from 1046 BCE to 256 BCE,
Okay.
there was, you know perfectly that all those classics have been written most of the time by aristocrats coming from the cadet branches of the nobility. Okay, so you have the same smell because those people got the same education. And you're right, it was in the Qi principality that all that legacy has been put in synthesis and given to the Han imperial house, who received that legacy from the Zhou dynasty and transmitting that legacy to us, okay, to later generations. So that was the second layer of my answer. But the first layer of my answer is that those people most of the time were aristocrats during the Zhou dynasty. So it is inevitable that we have the same smell. Those guys receive practically the same education. Is that you speak to an American of the upper middle class or of the upper class, they all went to Stanford, Harvard, or Princeton, or Columbia. It is inevitable that they talk more or less the same language.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you so much for all this information. One thing I'd like to comment on this translation is if you, I know if you are looking for the yin yang or like the book of change, I Ching, this kind of interpretation, you probably will not find out in among and my my work. Okay, because looking at the text, there's no yin yang, only once. Okay, and there's no the book of change or gua or this kind of thing. Okay, so I will rely on either Kwang or Peggy. Okay, so I will consider that would be your interpretation, especially Kwang will do on the epistemology, kind of consciousness, this kind of interpretation. And unfortunately, all this word, all this concept is not in the text, but it doesn't mean Tao Te Ching is not talking about this. That will rely on these people, to interpret. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just want to add that Jason and Amon represent the orthodox line, and I'm here for the heresies.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And I think that makes things very, very rich. And Amon is not unusual to heresy. We will notice that he turns upside down whenever he walks away. And next up is going to be Peter, followed by Joe. Peter.
I think when it comes down to we're reading the De Dao Jing, and this idea of De is not something, it's more to be put into practice rather than understood. And I think that is the attitude that I think is foremost important when reading these, as ways of not just to read about how one can paint, but what does it mean to apply such painting with mind, with attention, so that the scholar not merely studies it but practices it, right? So I believe that each stanza, each chapter has things to put into practice that are new and interesting and worthwhile to put into practice and not merely collect in the great big pile of ideas that we can intellectually, keep in the background to fill up the hard drive of all these different miscellaneous trivia. So what does it mean to actually run the program within this context? And I believe within this stanza, it's most important in regards to that, not to say, I'm trying to look at this chapter in relationship to itself, that the Tao, I believe, is sort of more or less interpreted as absurd. It is, the intellect cannot swallow it up. It cannot be killed. It cannot be put in its place in its drawer. And so that is why the lower man laughs at it, because it doesn't make sense. It is something that is beyond making of sense. So what does it mean for the scholar to move from the comfortable intellect into the absurd in order to try to relate the intellect to it, not the absurd to the intellect, as a movement towards, so much of these verses, it is in relationship to this idea of breaking down common sense of these particular ideas. It breaks down these forms of order in order to really, I think, say over and over in different ways that this is beyond understanding. And so to try to kill it and bring it to understanding will not, lead you to actually appreciating the Tao, but to create an image of it that you find pleasing, but is not the living experience of it. It's like we may understand the concept of fire, but when we see an actual flame, it is constantly changing and shifting, yet remains the same. So what is that more noetic relationship to that experience, that whiff of it, that flavor of it, that fruit, and not the flower, so that we can experience it in the depths of ourselves as a functional relationship and not merely an idea that we find aesthetically pleasing.
Wonderful. Beautifully put. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Yulia. Joe.
Yeah, that was excellent. So, for me, I think that actually I'll address really quickly what Madeline had said. And I thought that was an interesting observation, because one of the things that I did not see initially is Sun Tzu. What I did see was actually the war that one has with themselves. So the idea that, going forward seems like a retreat, that you have to allow certain things die. You have to allow certain beliefs die in order to grow. So that this is and Karl Popper puts this very well. You have to let part of yourself die in order for yourself to live. And so I think that is one of the things that that you can see, as far as sometimes you have to admit something was wrong, with you. So you feel like you've gone back, but really you're growing. It's the war, both externally and internally, that I think it kind of represents. I think the highest virtues seem empty line was actually especially interesting as well. I think that it directly, deals with the importance of humility. And the idea, if you go back to my favorite verse in the Tao Te Ching, number 17, where the very highest is barely known and the people say we did it, and it's talking about the leader that actually doesn't necessarily, they're not feared, that they're not celebrated, but they're humble, and they actually take they understand that humility is actually leadership, not necessarily this direct way of telling people what to do. So and then this concept of easy being hard, I really think that also gets to one of the more important points with that you can kind of see throughout these all the translations. There's a simplicity that actually it is when you're talking about easy. Easy way seems hard. That that simplicity is in nature are ideal, but we often value things that are much more complex. We value the intricacies and ecosystems that seem very analytically and aesthetically pleasing. So I think that that's an interesting way of looking at it versus complexity versus simplicity, because in the West we definitely value complexity.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Amon, and then Yulia and Mark. Amon.
Thank you. Peter's comments and then Joe's made me have to capture that image I dropped into the chat of the vinegar tasters. This is a classic Chinese painting depicting the three schools: Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. And each of them are encountering life. The Confucians encounter life and they taste it as sour. And so Confucius is scowling there as a sour face, because life is suffering. Because it is to be educated out of you, the sort of lesser instincts. The Buddhists see life as all as suffering, and therefore they treat life as bitter. Buddha is grimacing at the bitterness of the vinegar, and Lao Tzu is tasting it and smiling because they see life as sweet. And this is the idea that an aesthetic can be interpreted very differently between three different people, between three different schools of thought. But what you get in Taoism is try to appreciate the unappreciated. Try to revel in what others will overlook or dismiss or grimace or balk at, because what is actually there can be very sweet, but you have to have a mind that can hold paradox in place in order to appreciate it thoroughly. And yeah, I think their comments sort of arched at that. It just seemed that image needed to be there to give it a concrete example.
Thank you, Amon. Next up is going to be Yulia, followed by Mark. Yulia.
Hi, I wanted to just double check about the translation about if the inferior hadn't laughed, it would not be the Tao. So in the one that I had, this was impersonal. It wouldn't be the way if there weren't jokes about it. And I also heard one, I think that if it couldn't be laughed at, it wouldn't be the Tao, right? Like an impersonal translation, which has one meaning, right? Which has like this philosophy is so real. It exists so strongly. It's not fragile. It can handle being laughed at. You can ridicule it and it will withstand whatever you throw at it. But the personalized one that you have, if the inferior hadn't laughed, it would not be the Tao, has a very different meaning. So I just wanted to ask for some clarification on that. Thanks.
Go ahead, Jason or Ramon.
Yes, I think that's a very, very valid question, and no wonder have a different implication, because in the probably a better way to show this translation. So I think this Yulia is talking about this one, right? Okay, so this one I translate this one. Unfortunately, Chinese text you don't have the subject, so here is no subject. Just like if not laughing is not the Tao, so we don't know what does the author means, right? Who is not laughing, right? So I just have to assume, because just mention the inferior scholar, okay, he laughed loudly. Then we just assume they means the inferior scholar hadn't laughed, it would not be the Tao. So that's the way to do it, because there's no subject on this one. So if have a different meaning, then that's have a different meaning. So
Thanks, Jason. Thank you.
Thank you, Yulia. Next up is Mark.
Thank you. And I think that Yulia's question was nothing to laugh at. I also want to ask, thank you for smiling at that. I also really want to ask about the laughter, because I've always been intrigued by it. And I wonder if our interpretation of the laughter also can have an implication for how we understand this hierarchy of the superior scholar, the average scholar, and the inferior. I think Peter, in this round, very early on, mentioned that, of course, he laughed because he didn't understand it. And I think these lines are asking us to think about the nature of laughter. And if we don't come up with an interpretation of what we think is meant by the laughter, then we really wouldn't understand the verse. So, you know, we laugh, like Peter suggested, when we don't understand something. We may laugh at it out of embarrassment. We can also laugh at things which surprise us. You know, when someone says something unexpected, it often elicits laughter. But to try to get a better understanding of what may be meant by laughter here, I went back to the Analects, and I think it's only mentioned in one verse, that is 14:13, where the master asked the servant of another master if it was true that he never spoke, or he never laughed, or he never took anything. And the answer was, well, he only speaks when necessary, and he only laughs when he's happy, so people don't grow tired of his laughing. And I think that gave me a slightly different perspective. If the inferior scholar is laughing because he's happy, then perhaps it's suggesting that he sees something in the Tao that the other two scholars missed. He sees the paradox. He sees the contradictions that are then laid out in the rest of this verse. Maybe something that escapes the superior scholar who just tries to live according to the Tao, and the middle scholar who has an ambiguous relationship with the Tao. Maybe the laughter is something positive. That's my suggestion.
Thank you, Mark. All right, folks, you know what, PG, I would love to hear your take on this entire verse, please. You know, you've been so kind talking about this, so please go ahead.
Thank you. I think I concur what Jason was saying. Most of the verse mostly are relatively uncontroversial and understood very similarly by most translators. There are a few lines I do feel worth to mention that need to be read in conjunction with other verses, like most of them, but particularly those lines. The lines I'm talking about is talking about the greatest square or great square, greatest sound, and the greatest vessel and greatest image. Now, the original character, Da, which means great or greatest, is actually referring to Tao. That is very clearly in verse 25. Tao here is referring to the nameless, the non-being, right? It's also at the same time, the author also mentioned the great. So the great here, the great square is really mean the square of the Tao. Now let me explain what square mean. So firstly, I want to emphasize that the character Tao, the Da is actually have a double meaning. In one sense, it's a great or greatest. At the same time, it's actually referring to Tao. Now the next one, the square, the greatest square, actually logically you can think the greatest square would have no corner, right? Because you imagine the square is too big and big, then eventually you don't see the square. Now here, the square actually means rule. Now, this is coming from another Chinese maxim. There is a saying, without a rule, there will be no square or circle. Now, square is formed based on rule. So here, what the underlying meaning here, the greatest square have no corner. It means the Tao actually have no rules. Because any rules, any square will have a corner. What corner mean? If you look at the connect with the verse 59, you realize here the corner means cut someone off. You hurt someone. As long as you have a rule, you can exclude someone. The Tao is such, the best rule, the greatest square means the best rule, is have no rule because they have no square. It embraces everyone. It acknowledges everyone plays a role. So that means greatest square. Now, greatest vessel. My translation is based on another version, not the popular version. I believe that the popular version, that character is due to a typo. Someone have handwriting. They sort of erased the left part and been treated as something like the extra component, and therefore it become the late. But actually it means free. Now, greatest vessel means Tao. Tao is such a vessel that is never crafted because it's always there. It never need to be completed. So it's different from any other vessel. That's what the line talking about. Now, the sound of the Tao, the greatest sound, is hardly audible, means it's silence. That's what the Tao is silence. Silence is the gold, is the gold. That's what the Chinese saying. I would add to this based on this book. Silence is Tao. And that's why the Lao Tzu saying, the teaching without words is the best. The silence. A beautiful music, if it's full of beautiful notes, it will not be beautiful overall. You need silence in between. You need a stop note. So silence is very important. And when we speak too much, we convey less. Too many words conveys less. Because everyone possesses this consciousness, awareness. You should let the awareness have its say, particularly as a parents to their children. If you speak too much about, they will not listen. They will not hear. The similar thing about the greatest, the image, great image is formless. This is obvious. It's talking about the whole universe is like image of the Tao. And if you look at the totality, there is no individual. It's a formless. It doesn't have any particular form because they are actually all wave form, right? They're all moving all the time. And that's why someone saying all the existence you see is actually not there. It's just an illusion. That's
Thank
what
you.
I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Next up is, and I really like all your interpretation here. It's, it's adding more depth to the understanding. Thank you. Next up is Madeline.
Thanks, Paige. I appreciated the elucidation on the square. It reminded me of an earlier or some other verse that we discussed at some point about a tent pole or the absence of a tent pole. And then the sounds, there was also a verse about the different shapes of things and the wind moving through them and how they make different sounds. And the wind would be the Tao, I guess. Does anyone else remember those two verses we've discussed or know them? All right, maybe I was just hallucinating.
Yes. Thank you, Madeline. Appreciate bringing it. There is just so much richness in this text that there are these echoes of our memories at various places, and I'm sure one of these days you're going to find these verses. All right. Anybody else wants to comment? We've got about 13 minutes left for the main part, and then after that, I would like to continue the conversation. PG, if you would have time, I would love if you could stay, and I would like to talk to you more about the Tao and your approach to Tao Te Ching. Jason and Amon, is there anything you want to do, or shall we just launch into the discussion with Peichi and his approach to the Tao?
I don't know that we'll have a lot of time to do 42, the service that it
Exactly.
needs.
No.
And I say that mostly because I did a paper on 42. So I know that it has layers and depth. No, I think open conversation for 13 minutes is not a bad idea. That's about how long I've got before I've got to run.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's do an open conversation for 13 minutes, and then I'll talk to Peichi. Jason, does that? Okay. Peter, go ahead.
I think that's look like we only can finish 2 chapters every week. But according to Tao, the longer the text, we will take the shorter time. And so this 40 is very short. That's why we take the longest time. So we try to follow the way of the philosophy of Taoism. So, okay, so that's it. And thank you, Paige. And I think I need to correct the part of the translation because you answer one of the question. Let me show, because the first part, okay, when talking about different kind of superior, appears or look like, I think that's correct because Chinese word use word. And I kind of the puzzle on the second part because the text doesn't use the Chinese word raw or appears, right? Doesn't have this one. So according to your explanation, Da is Dao. Okay, so, and that makes sense because I should change the translation. I should take out the appears, right? It's not appear, no corner. It's not the great vessel doesn't appear. It is no corner, is not complete because there's no Chinese word raw, right? That means appear. And then that in this interpretation, I think that's it's not go further, it's go back to the text. Okay, thank you.
Come on.
I figure since we're talking about the Great Square, it should be also mentioned what the metaphor is within the typical or the classic Chinese mind. If anyone has ever seen the Chinese coin with the circle and the square cut in the center, that is a metaphoric depiction of heaven, circular, and earth, which is said to be square. And so the great circle is the heavens, all of the heavens. The great square would be all the earth. And the metaphor still stands of this returning being without rule necessarily, because anything that does arise on our planet has its roots in the earth, and anything that is in demise will eventually return to the earth. And so that image of square is a depiction or a way of evoking the idea of, between that dichotomy, and I hesitate to even use the term dichotomy, of heaven and earth, what is more yang, what is more yin? Earth is the more yin. It is a depiction or an indication of the Da Yin, the great yin, the most yin. So one more layer to add to that that discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Amon. Next up is Peter.
In relationship to the square and the circle, I have to bridge this idea. I highly recommend the novella of Edward Abbott of Flatland in relationship to that type of reflection. Not saying it's related, but still just wanted to put that anywhere. So to me, I do think that in relationship to this idea of the Tao is somehow closer to silence than to sound. You know, we have philosophies where what matters is to think. We have other philosophies, what matters is to stop thought. Some believe that to think is to be closer to God, than to study, to reflect. Where others believe, no, we need to get rid of thought. That is to be closer to God. And so to me, I think it's difficult to, in regards to the conceptualization of where is the Tao and how can we get closer to it. And I believe that it's easy to fall into this idea that the Tao is more someplace than another place. And in that, create a dogma in regards to what form we should take, whether it be to stop feeling so we can have an unbiased thinking, or to stop thinking so we can be truly in the feelings of love or something, or to say, no, that's all illusion, just be in the body, be in the empirical existence. All of these different searching around of trying to conform the mind and body into a particular shape of duality, where the Tao is good or God is good and everything else is bad, and we need to move from the bad to the good and conform. And to me, in relationship to De and the idea of De, that is a form of conditioning, yes, when it comes down to trying to explore the nature of the good, and the nature of virtue, and moving towards it. But the Tao, as being non-dual, as being a relationship that is not about going here nor there. I do not wish to discredit the sacredness of silence, but nor to have necessarily exemplify sound or speech and potential to profane. But I do think it is that kind of chasing after an endless wheel in relationship to trying to perfect an idealized shape and trying to keep that shape indefinitely. I think is part of the erroneous nature of the innate nature of the Tao, that it cannot be then achieved, but related to differently depending on the relationship that we are cultivating based on our own gnosis experience of it, and trying to, through that, move beyond all our conceptualizations of it, so that whenever we develop a biased conceptualization, we realize the folly of that, not to get rid of conceptualization of itself, but to endlessly refine it so that the square becomes the circle in relationship to the infinite nature of pi, because it always goes on, right? Endlessly.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. A quick question for Jason and Amon. So what is it like the second time, Jason, doing the translation for the second time?
Amon, you want to say something?
I'm a hell of a lot more confident to give feedback.
Yeah, I think you are right. You are right. You are right. Yeah, feel more, and then kind of become more orthodoxy. Okay, according to Guang, because the first time do it, I kind of form my principle. Okay, what's the rule I have to follow? I have to resist a lot of good interpretation. Okay, because the text doesn't say it. Okay, so so I think it's become more orthodoxy. Okay, let's put it this way. Okay, and then sometimes I feel much easier. Sometimes I feel like I corner myself, and then it become difficult. You know.
Yeah, no, I'm just delighted that you guys are doing this, because I mean the engagement. This is the only way we can actually begin to get into this text, and I'm just tremendously grateful that you two guys are doing this, and it's getting so many amazing people here, and each person is trying to commune with the Tao in their own way, and to see that, um, you know, it's just amazing, because every time, this is the same experience I had the first time, and this is even more so, because I do read multiple translations before coming, but no matter how much work I put in, I end up getting so much more from these discussions, because each of us kind of communes with the Tao in their own way, and each of us can show another aspect or another angle on it. So thank you.
I
Thank
will
you.
say that this was the first meetup I joined you with was the Tao Te Ching a couple years back. And I had studied this for a long time. I had a very, I won't say particular, I thought I had a pretty capacious way of understanding it. But having gone through it, and then especially with examining the analytics and the art of war, and then returning to this and seeing it through that, I feel like this is the most scholarly approach I've ever taken to the Tao Te Ching, which is saying something. But it also has created a vast new way of looking at it through sort of that zeitgeist Quan was talking about, of what all schools of text and thought really are, which are protracted conversations between people over time addressing one another's points. And so when Madeline says she gets the Sun Tzu vibes from verse 41, now I'm looking at it and thinking, okay, is there an argument being made here against Sun Tzu and against the art of war? And yeah, I can see it. I can see it, because the thrust of the Sun Tzu is means, have the means to do X, Y, or Z. And what this chapter is saying is, you'll find means in unexpected places that other people will overlook if you don't just dismiss it out of hand, because the orthodoxy tells you it is lesser than, inferior, not worth it. Like I mentioned, first time in my life I've been accused of orthodoxy, but I've also been accused of optimism once before. Two things my mother would not accuse me of. So thank you all. I'm enjoying this. It's a great experience again, and I will see everybody next week.
Thank you.
Mamanzo.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
I also need to go, but I just really just repeat what Aman said. You know, I think that's true. Aman said the second time we feel much more confident to take any kind of objection and then anything. So as we mentioned, the purpose of here is not show the best translation in the world. The here is show a target so you can criticize. For the person who know Chinese well, like Peggy and Kwang and anyone, very welcome to tell me, oh, I don't think that's right, or I have a different understanding. For the person who know, it's also important to tell me, what do you understand? What's your interpretation? Because translation is a two-way. You bring something to your target audience. So I need to know what's the audience. I can, or even I talk to Lao Tzu, the person himself, I still need to translate to English. I need to know how does people respond to that. So, so that's very important to me. And then, so thank you. And another thing, last thing, regarding for this Saturday, I'm starting the philosophy, Asian philosophy philosophies, and the reason I'm talking about this is the topic is the spirit of Chinese philosophy is from the book the author Feng Youlan. I read this one before he talk about Chinese text full of suggestiveness, okay, suggestiveness, okay. So the second translation, I do feel this way because a lot of thing is suggestion, okay? So it doesn't give you need to do this way, especially in the Tao Te Ching text. That's why we have a very wide different interpretation. And then I think we all sort of agree there's no the correct interpretation. Yeah, anyway, thank you.
Thank you. And instead of calling it doing this the second time, I think return to the Tao is a very good way of thinking about it, because we all know that's the nature of it. So wonderful. Thank you.